Alright, let's step into the 18th century and talk about prose, fiction and drama during the Augustan period. This age wasn't just about poetry, it was also the time of pamphlets, journalism, novels, coffee houses and some of the strictest censorship in theatre history. Let's start with the Licensing Act of 1737. This law gave the government tight control over the theatre and it's been asked in exam. Why was it introduced? Because plays had become dangerously political, poking fun at ministers and even the king. Robert Walpole, the Prime Minister at the time, pushed the act through to clamp down on satire. Under this system, the Lord Chamberlain became the official theatre censor with an examiner of plays assisting him. Political and religious content was carefully policed. The act actually remained in force until the Theatres Act of 1968, so for more than 2 centuries, theatre censorship was the law in Britain. Just to put it in context, censorship had originally been handled by the Master of the Revels, like Edmund Tilney in Elizabeth's reign, but it paused during the Civil War when theatres were closed in 1642, then restarted at the Restoration in 1660. Now, while plays were censored, coffee houses and clubs became the beating heart of literary life. Imagine smoky rooms full of chatter, argument, gossip, and pamphlets being passed around. Coffee houses were open to men of all classes and they became social and political hubs. Some even grew into institutions. Lloyd's Coffee House eventually became Lloyd's of London, the great insurance company. Will's Coffee House gained fame thanks to John Dryden, and that exact detail has been asked in exam. The culture was lively, sometimes rowdy, and yes, alcohol often made things even noisier. Alexander Pope himself was influenced by this coffee house culture. In fact, The Rape of the Lock was inspired by a piece of coffee house gossip, and that connection has also been tested in exam. From these circles came literary clubs, 2 of which are crucial for exam: the Scriblerus Club and the Kit-Cat Club. The Scriblerus Club was formed in 1714 and lasted until around 1745. Its members were some of the biggest names of the Augustan age: Swift, Pope, Arbuthnot, John Gay, Thomas Parnell, and occasionally political allies like Robert Harley and Henry Street John. Their shared goal was to satirize the abuses of learning. Together they created the persona of Martinus Scriblerus, a kind of pedantic scholar used as a mask for their satire. A lot of their material wasn't published until the 1740s, but it inspired works like the Memoirs of Martinus Scriblerus and even the second edition of Pope's Dunciad. Henry Fielding admired them so much that he used the pen name Scriblerus Secundus, a fact that has been asked in exam. Richard Owen Cambridge even wrote the Scribleriad, a mock epic with Martinus as its hero. Then there was the Kit-Cat Club, another exam favorite. This was a Whig club with both literary and political members. They first met at a tavern in Shire Lane run by Christopher Cat, whose mutton pies, Kit Cats, gave the club its name. That detail about the pies has been tested in exam, so don't miss it. Later, they met at the Fountain Tavern on the Strand, Barn Elms, and even at Jacob Tonson's country home. In summer, they gathered at the Upper Flask in Hampstead Heath. Its literary members included William Congreve, John Locke, Addison, and Sir John Vanbrugh. The political members were a who's who of Whig power: the Duke of Somerset, the Earl of Burlington, the Duke of Newcastle, the Earl of Stanhope, Viscount Cobham, Abraham Stanion, and of course Sir Robert Walpole. These names have also been directly tested in exam. So the Augustan age wasn't just about poetry. It was about censorship in the theatre, pamphlets and journalism shaping politics, gossip turning into literature in coffee houses, and powerful clubs like the Scriblerus and Kit-Cat shaping culture and satire. Let's talk about Sir Richard Steele, essayist, dramatist, journalist, politician, and one of the most important prose writers of the early 18th century. Born in Dublin in 1672, Steele was educated at Charterhouse and Oxford, though he never took a degree. He joined the army as a cadet, but soon moved into writing and politics. His life was full of passion and quarrels. He served as a Whig member of Parliament, was expelled, later leaned toward the Tories, and even had public disagreements with his old friend Addison. But what makes Steele unforgettable is his role in periodical writing. In April 1609, he launched the Tatler, a thrice-weekly journal written under the pseudonym Isaac Bickerstaff. That pseudonym had already been made popular by Swift, and in Steele's hands, Bickerstaff became a witty observer of manners. In his very first issue, Steele laid down his mission to expose the false arts of life, to pull off the disguises of cunning, vanity, and affectation, and to recommend a general simplicity in our dress, discourse, and behavior. This line has been directly asked in exam. Steele wrote most of the Tatler himself, 188 essays out of 271. Addison added 42, and they collaborated on another 36. Eventually, Whig-Tory conflicts forced the paper to shut down, but Steele wasn't done. In 1711, he and Addison started the Spectator with the quiet, observant Mr. Spectator as narrator. 2 years later, they launched The Guardian, where the narrator, Nestor Ironside, advised a fictional lizard family. Together, these papers set the model for English essay writing, blending wit, morality, and lively observation. And don't forget both, the Tatler and the Spectator ended with Steele alone signing the final issue, a detail that examiners love. Steele also experimented with drama. His best-known prose comedies are The Funeral from 1701, The Lying Lover in 1703, The Tender Husband in 1705, and The Conscious Lovers in 1722. That last play is often seen as a move towards sentimental comedy, a gentler alternative to Restoration satire, and has been highlighted in exam. He also created other short-lived journals, The Guardian in 1713, The Reader in 1714, The Englishman in 1715, and The Plebeian in 1718. All of these show how restless and energetic he was. One delightful example of Steele's style is The Trumpet Club, written under the Isaac Bickerstaff persona in The Tatler. Here, the narrator chats about the eccentric members of a club, Sir Geoffrey Notch with his chair and pipe, Major Matchlock with his endless war stories, honest old Dick Reptile with his quiet chuckle, and others who trade tales and wit. The humor lies in the way Steele gently mocks the long-windedness of old men while still capturing their charm. These sketches remind us why Steele was so beloved. He combined humor with benevolence, satire with sympathy. So, if you're revising Steele for exam, remember the big points. The Tatler in 1709 with Isaac Bickerstaff, The Spectator in 1711, The Guardian in 1713, his famous line about exposing the false arts of life, and his comedies like The Conscious Lovers. Steele gave English prose a new voice, witty, moral, and conversational, a voice that still echoes in modern essays and journalism. Let's talk about Joseph Addison, poet, politician, essayist, and one of the key figures of the Augustan age. Addison was educated first at Charterhouse and then at Oxford, where he became a fellow of Magdalen College. Early on, the Whig leaders noticed his talent and saw him as a future literary supporter. They even funded his travels through Europe. But in 1703, when the Whigs lost power, Addison was left stranded in poverty. Everything changed in 1704 when he wrote The Campaign. This long poem, written in heroic couplets, praised the Whigs' war policy and celebrated Marlborough's victory at Blenheim. The poem isn't exactly great literature, people sometimes call it a rhymed gazette, but it made Addison famous. It includes a passage that compares Marlborough to an angel riding a storm, a section often asked in exam. The success of this poem earned Addison a government post courtesy of Lord Treasurer Godolphin. Addison's later attempts at drama were less successful. His opera Rosamond in 1706 and his play The Drummer in 1715 both failed. His most ambitious drama, Cato in 1713, was a hit politically, but critics found it stiff and unoriginal. Written in blank verse, it ran for 35 nights, but Addison never became known as a dramatist. Where Addison really shone was prose. In 1709, his friend Richard Steele launched the Tatler, and Addison soon joined in. His first contribution was in issue number 18, semi-political in tone. Steele wrote the bulk 188 essays, but Addison added 42. Then came the Spectator in 1711, and this was the real breakthrough. It sold up to 10,000 copies a day, and Addison wrote 274 of the total 555 essays. Steele contributed 236. Together, they gave the English essay its classic form. The Spectator mixed light topics, fashion, jokes, and conversation with deeper themes like prayer, jealousy, and death. Addison used allegories like the famous Vision of Mirza to explore moral truths. He also introduced us to the Spectator Club, a set of fictional characters: Sir Roger de Coverley, the eccentric old knight; Will Honeycomb, a middle-aged beau; Sir Andrew Freeport, the merchant; Captain Sentry, the soldier; and Mr. Spectator himself, a quiet figure modelled on Addison. These essays, known as the Coverley Papers, have been called the first step toward the English novel, and yes, this has been asked in exam. Addison continued writing for The Guardian in 1713, contributing 53 essays before it folded after 175 issues. His essays were witty, polished, and mild in tone. Jonathan Swift, though, dismissed The Spectator as too effeminate, saying he wouldn't meddle with it. Still, Addison's ability to blend wit with morality helped shape the manners and conversation of his age. In politics, Addison rose high. He married a countess in 1716 and became Secretary of State in 1717. But his health declined and he died in 1719 at the age of just 47. So, remember him for the campaign, for his role in the Tatler and the Spectator, for the Coverley Papers, and for his refined essays. Addison's prose style, graceful, witty, moral, without being heavy-handed, made him one of the greatest essayists in English literature, and he's an exam favorite. Alright, let's talk about the Tatler, one of the most influential literary journals of the early 18th century. It was started by Richard Steele in 1709, and even though it ran for just 2 years, it completely reshaped English prose and journalism. Now, here's the fun part. Steele wrote under the pseudonym Isaac Bickerstaff, Esquire. This was the very first time a journal consistently used a persona in the first person. That detail Isaac Bickerstaff has been directly asked in exam. Addison and Swift both joined in under the same name, so it felt like Bickerstaff was a witty observer moving through London society. The Tatler came out 3 times a week and pulled together gossip, essays, and reflections on contemporary manners. But instead of heavy politics, Steele kept it light middle-class manners, everyday life, and a very Whiggish outlook. To give it structure, he placed his reporters in London's 4 big coffee houses. White supplied gossip on gallantry and entertainment, Wills gave poetry, the Grecian covered learning, and Street James handled foreign and domestic news. This clever subdivision has been asked in exam almost word for word. Of course, the Tatler didn't just report. Steele mixed real gossip with invented stories, creating a blend of news, wit, and moral reflection. That's why it influenced not just the Spectator that came after, but also Johnson's Rambler, Goldsmith's Citizen of the World, and later essayists like Charles Lamb and William Hazlitt. The journal ran from 12th April 1709 until 2nd January 1711. When Steele and Addison collected the issues, they published them as The Lucubrations of Isaac Bickerstaff, Esquire. Only in that collected edition did they reveal who the real authors were. Afterward, they decided to retire the Bickerstaff persona and launch the Spectator with a new voice. So, why does the Tatler matter? Because Steele's innovation, blending essays, gossip, and character sketches in a conversational style, basically laid the foundation for modern journalism. Let's start with the Spectator. After the success of the Tatler, Addison and Steele teamed up again in 1711 to launch this daily paper. It ran for just over a year, from 1711 to 1712, producing 555 issues, each around 2,500 words long. Later, the essays were collected into 7 volumes, and in 1714, Addison revived it briefly without Steele, giving us an 8th. Now here's something examiners love. In Spectator number 10, Mr. Spectator declares his aim to enliven morality with wit. That line has been directly asked in exam, and it really captures what made the paper unique. Addison wanted to bring philosophy out of universities and into everyday life, into clubs, assemblies, and coffee houses. Unlike earlier journals, the Spectator deliberately reached out to women. Steele even said the paper would be more useful to the female world and recommended it as part of a lady's tea equipage. Imagine it, a journal designed to sit next to your teacup as part of polite conversation. The paper gave the middle classes ready-made topics for social discussion: family, marriage, courtesy, morality, all framed with Enlightenment values and written in an easy conversational style. That's why it influenced not just London coffee houses, but also later essays across the century. Now, after Addison and Steele, Samuel Johnson carried the torch with the Rambler. This ran from 1750 to 1752, appearing twice a week, Tuesdays and Saturdays. Over 2 years, Johnson produced 208 essays, and yes, that exact number has been asked in exam. The Rambler was aimed at the rising middle class, helping them integrate into polite aristocratic culture. It's often described as Johnson's most consistent and sustained prose work, but unlike the light tone of Addison and Steele, Johnson's essays were weighty, moral, and serious. Later, Johnson shifted gears with The Idler, published from 1758 to 1760. This time, the essays appeared weekly in the Universal Chronicle. There were 103 in total, most written by Johnson himself. These were shorter, more casual, sometimes tossed off like letters, making them feel lighter than the Rambler. Still, they carried Johnson's stamp of moral reflection. Fun fact: one essay, The Vulture, which satirized war, was suppressed and replaced with a piece on debtors' prisons. This omission has been directly noted in exam. So think of it this way: the Spectator set the standard for polite moral journalism. The Rambler gave it Johnson's serious moral depth, and the Idler lightened it up for a broader audience. Together, they shaped the essay as a literary form in the 18th century.